Welcome everyone, and thank you for making it this far in the conference. I'm Dan, and I'll be co-presenting with René and Ioana on our paper. And that's a classroom. And in that classroom, we have, sorry I have to stand behind this, we have a lot of social cues, and you can observe your peers ambiently or implicitly or explicitly. And throughout, you're always getting this feedback on what's going on, who's showing up late, who's submitting all their assignments on time, who's submitting them early, who shows up. And we can contrast that with other forms of feedback, not in a classroom, so in a MOOC on edX, for example. And instead of this rich environment with lots of social cues, we're left with this sense of feedback for your progress through an edX course. And, well, we want to fix that, where we want to augment this and make it a richer environment as far as social cues and social comparison. And we want to do that specifically by providing social cues to help your self-regulation, so to make you a more effective learner. And how do you become a better, more effective learner? By being more aware of your learning behaviors. So what we did, we designed a feedback system. And in this presentation, first we'll describe the design of that feedback system. Then we'll describe how we implemented and tested its effectiveness in our experiments. And we adapted it throughout these 4 experiments. And René will share the special experiment on when we manipulated a cultural variable. And then we'll wrap things up. So I'll hand it over to Ioana now.
Hello everyone, I'm Ioana, and I would like to spend the next few minutes talking a bit about the design of our feedback system. At the base of our feedback system lies social comparison theory, which was developed in the 50s by Festinger, and it actually says that we establish our social or personal worth by comparing ourselves to our peers when we don't have any objective means of evaluating ourselves. This theory was extensively evaluated later on, and specifically in the field of learning. Some experiments show that comparing oneself with peers that do slightly better can actually support learners to perform better, and this is obvious in their grades. So we try to use this theory in our design, and in order to provide a context for the feedback that we're offering to the learners, we are using role models, which we built based on the learners who were successful in a previous edition of a MOOC. And these successful learners are learners who earned a passing grade in a previous edition. Also, to make sure that we have slightly better models so learners can compare themselves with, we create an average learner graduate, as you will see later on. When we were brainstorming on what kind of design we would like to use for the feedback system, we had plenty of options, as you might know, starting from box plots or bar charts up to even more complicated designs. However, in our decisions, we were mainly guided by three goals. And the first one, we wanted our system to be traceable, which means that the data that we showed on the widget, on the dashboard or the feedback system would be data that we can actually take it from trace logs on the EDX platform. Secondly, we wanted the design to be scrutable, which means that we wanted learners to be able to understand very easily and in one glance their feedback. And finally, we wanted the feedback to be actionable. We wanted to show learners exactly where and in which areas they could improve themselves and give them cues for actions. And considering this is how our dashboard or feedback system looks like. As you can see, we have a spider chart and along its axis several metrics. We also have the learners, which are represented with the blue color, and also the role model, which is the average graduate in yellow color. Of course, this is a visualization that might be quite controversial or create some controversies. However, we decided on this specific design for three main reasons. First one, because it's an embodied representation of multiple metrics. In one glance, in one visualization, you can see several metrics and how you perform along several metrics. Also, on the same graph, you can present several indicators without having to scroll down on the web page. And finally, it's a medium in which you can easily compare yourself to the other peers, especially because you can see the overlap in areas. We developed the feedback system through several iterations, which were tested. And as we progressed with the design, we added different characteristics to it, or different features. Firstly, we added some interactivity features, which meant that once learners hovered over different points on the feedback system, they could get more detailed information and specific values for their metrics. Secondly, we added a planning ahead feature, which meant that once learners clicked on the legend, or the metric in the legend, that it's hidden by default, they could see how the behavior of the graduate learners will be at the end of next week. And finally, we added evaluation of their behavior in a message shown above that was framed according to different criteria. Well, this was the design of the feedback system. We did several experiments with it, and then we'll talk more about that.
So now I get to tell you the answer to the question of did it work? And yes, it worked. Done. No, thank you. Oh, but what worked? Okay, we have research questions. And the research questions are about achievement and engagement. So achievement, we're talking final grade or course completion, or earning that course certificate. And also the behavior you exhibit along the way. So do you watch more videos? Do you answer more quiz questions? Do you spend more time on the platform? We measured both of those, but earning the certificate is our primary outcome measure. And we ran this in 4 MOOCs. I'm going to focus on the first 3 right now. The MOOCs are mid-range to small, with the standard abysmal passing rates, except René will address this one later. The pre-calc MOOC has an especially abysmal passing rate. And so now for assignment to treatment conditions, randomly assigned, these are the total. And we also impose this 5-minute activity threshold. So we don't include just everyone who is enrolled in the course and assigned to the condition, because that doesn't give them enough time or exposure to the condition. So we only want to include people in our analyses who are actually engaged and exposed to the treatment. So now the results, primary outcome measure, course completion. And across all 3 courses, we see significant increases. And this is what it looks like graphed out. So the first 3 courses consistently increased, and overall we see a similar effect. This is to say that learners who were exposed to this learning tracker are significantly more likely to earn a course certificate than those who were not.
So were these in repeated measures? So separate offerings, or you did AB within a single offering?
AB within a course. So during the water treatment course, half the learners were exposed to this, half weren't. Randomized within the course. So to address our first hypothesis, we can support the claim that this increases their course achievement. However, with the course engagement metrics, we do see a general trend towards more activity, but these trends are not statistically significant. So we can't make that claim, but I can say that we observe a heightened engagement level. And for the second research question, so we see that overall this helped the learners. Overall, we see that it increased their passing rates. But did it help everyone? And the answer is no. So we want to zoom in and figure out who specifically this intervention helped. And we looked at a few different measures of this. We divided people by age and gender, but what we landed on, the most interesting finding was that of prior education levels. So we divided students between those who have earned a bachelor's degree or higher and those who haven't. And what we see is that this effect, the significant effect for the increased completion rate in these courses, was only present for learners who were highly educated. So what does that say about our intervention? That says that we're not reaching all learners. So we're observing that different learners have different literacy levels or abilities to interpret these, what we use, data visualizations. But not all learners can interpret feedback the same way. So we need to figure out a way to deliver learners the feedback that they need in a way that they can actually understand. And René is going to talk more about that right now.
So I have the pleasure of talking about culture. One of the iterations that we did with this tool, so far it looks like following the successful crowd, showing people what the successful crowd looks like, helps them to try achieve those goals, look more like them, and be more likely to complete. To make it easier to interpret the representation that you saw, we thought about adding a summary statement at the top of it, summarizing the status that a learner is in at the moment in time. And what we did for that, and what we're trying to do as well is when we add some text that summarizes where a learner is at, that might imbue some values into how a learner thinks about achieving. Whether they think about achieving as an individual, pursuing their own goals, or whether they are thinking about it in a more collectivist sense. So we thought culture might be an important moderator in this context as to how to frame learners' engagement, learners' achievement at that point in time. So we're wondering, how can we change the framing of the summary sentence so that it benefits people in different cultural contexts? And the summary sentence looked like this. We added it right here up at the very top above the tool. And so it gave people either the message that they are behind, they're not doing as well as a successful learner, or that they are on track. They are looking good, they are on their best way to complete the course. And what we varied is how that sentence was framed. Either there was an individualistic, promotion-centered framing. Looks like you're right on track to achieve your goal. Keep taking advantage of the exciting new topics each week. Always push yourself to be successful. Very much focus on the you and achieving one's goals. In the control group, in the collectivist group, that looked like this. Looks like you're keeping up with the course for now. We're doing our best to introduce you to exciting new topics each week. Please don't let us down now. Right? You don't want to prevent the negative. And this might seem odd to someone who's grown up in an individualistic culture, but people in collectivist cultures, for them it's very important to avoid negative outcomes, to not disappoint others. Those are very important motivations in more Eastern cultures. So this is when someone was on track, but most often people were not on track, they were behind. So this is what that looked like in the individualistic condition. Looks like you're a bit behind achieving your goal, work harder to take advantage of the exciting new topics each week, always push yourself to be successful. And the same one for the collectivist one. Okay, so depending on what state a learner was in, we showed them one of these, and they were randomly assigned either to see the tool not at all, control condition, to see the tool with the individualistic framing, or to see the tool with the more collectivist framing. Okay? So just to remember, this is where it was, and it was shown every week in the course. Every week they saw at the beginning of their session, they saw the tool. Now we looked at two cultural dimensions to compare people. Right? The hypothesis was that people in more collectivist cultures would benefit from the collectivist framing. People in more individualistic cultures would benefit from the individualistic framing. So we looked at Hofstede's very established dimension of culture, individualism, collectivism. People in more individualistic cultures, they are more independent, they have looser social relationships, whereas people in more collectivist cultures, it's more of a tightly knit fabric of social relationships. Another dimension of culture we looked at was Gelfand's measure of tightness. People who live in more tight cultures, they think more about strongly enforced rules. For them, there's little tolerance for deviance. And people in more loose cultures, there's more tolerance for deviance. Rules are not as enforced. Okay? So these are two dimensions that correlate to some extent, but they're also different in important ways. We wanted to know for which one this works the best. Right? So it's a matching hypothesis. And what did we find? We did not find any evidence that people in more individualistic cultures liked the individualistic one better. They performed better with it. And we also didn't find any evidence that in more tight cultures, the individualistic one or the collectivist one was better. In general, these were all similarly good in this sample. But remember, Dan told you that our sample was pretty abysmal. We had a 5% completion rate for the activity threshold of 5 minutes, which is a very low bar, spending 5 minutes in the course, that everyone who spent at least 5 minutes was considered. And in this course, because it was a more introductory course, pre-calculus, there were a lot of people who didn't really pay much attention. So we bumped up the threshold. The reason why I told you those results is because those were the ones we pre-registered. We pre-registered exactly what we were going to do, all the analyses, so that's why I'm showing you those analyses that didn't work out. However, after raising the bar, increasing the threshold from 5 minutes to 1 hour, which is still relatively low, and reducing our sample size from 3,400 folks to 670, so we cut a lot of people there, but we're focusing on the ones who are more active, we get a completion rate in that sample that is more like the average of the other 3 courses in which we found the tool to work. Okay? So probably a more similar subpopulation. What do we find in that subpopulation? Well, it turns out that the individualistic framing was by far the best. It worked across cultural contexts. So much so that it increased from the control condition where there was a 13% completion rate to 20% completion, a 55% increase. And surprisingly, where it worked the best was in tight cultures. The individualistic framing worked the best in tight cultures. The sample size isn't very large, but it is a significant effect, and it's tripling completion rates in that context, from 12% to 36% if people were shown the individualistic framing. Why might that be? Well, people who come to MOOCs, they might not expect to be in a very collectivist environment. You're mostly on your own. You go there to fulfill your study goals. People use the forums very little. So appealing to more collectivist tendencies may not resonate with people in these environments. So let me just draw a few conclusions, in particular, next directions from this. So one is real time. This tool was shown every week, and the data was only updated on a weekly basis. So you couldn't really see where you were standing in real time compared to the more successful crowd. So what if we provide more real-time data? Would that help people make better use out of these systems than waiting a week before they see how they stand compared to successful learners? Second, framing. Clearly the framing didn't work out as we expected. It actually went in the opposite direction than what we expected. So how could one better frame to different cultural groups? Or is culture really what is most important here? Maybe utilizing the framing more for learners who have lower levels of education, who might need more support with actionable ways of implementing strategies to self-regulate in this environment, given the data that is provided. So what kind of framing can help people make better use of the information? And finally, one of the things that came up with this tool, with the design of the tool, is that the averages that we showed, the metrics that we showed, some of them may be difficult to represent. Let me give you an example. If there is a learner who spends 2 hours every day on the course, and a learner who spends 20 hours on the weekend, or 10 hours on the weekend, right? If you average those, you get some number that doesn't really represent any of these learners, right? But they're 2 different strategies, both of which could be quite effective. So why not show people different ways of being a successful learner? Someone who does it every day and is diligent, or someone who crams a little bit on the weekend because that's just how their time schedule works. So the idea of presenting personas rather than just the raw statistics, the averages, could be a fruitful way forward, especially for increasing belonging, seeing other people who might be more like you, personas that are male, personas that are female, personas that are from different parts of the world, could increase the sense of belonging in the environment. So those are some future directions, and we're happy to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Questions?
This is a great study. I really think it's fantastic. I want to congratulate you for pre-registering your questions before. That's great practice. I think that's really superb. And some some really interesting findings. Your main effect where you saw that there was an improvement in completion with your intervention, so that was significant, but the actual activity wasn't any more significant. Would you like to speculate about what's going on causally if the intervention isn't affecting the activity but does affect
So we showed we showed 6 measures of activity in the widget per experiment, and we found 2 measures to be consistently significant, 2 of the 6, and those 2 were number of quiz questions submitted and how early you submit. So those 2 were consistently between the 2 groups. The treatment group consistently submitted more questions and earlier than the control group. However, those 2 weren't significant enough to kind of bring the rest. Yeah. So now, and we tried different combinations as well. We said, because we ran 4 experiments, we said, maybe that combination wasn't so great, let's try something else. And just a general trend was that there was, I can say there was always increase in activity, but just not always significant. I know that doesn't get to the end of your question,
No, I see.
but if maybe it's just this overall increase in activity, yeah.
And the one that increased significantly was the
Questions.
most conducive to completion.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the fact that you included culture in your model, and I really congratulate you on taking this, and it's fantastic. I was just wondering if you know that particular students or particular learners from a particular culture, could you also in the next phase think about more adaptive releases that okay, if you're from Asian Asia, let's try different ways of collective to find kind of the sweet spot, because the way the fact that you find these two supplementers might be able to just get the balance of it.
Yeah. So the question was about whether we can adapt the content to the learner depending on where they're coming from culturally. And the answer is yes. We used their IP address in the analysis to identify where they were. And of course, since they're visiting the web page, we can map their IP address to their location, and then map their location to their cultural context, and then deliver content accordingly. I don't think we're there yet. I think we have to learn a little bit more about the way culture actually affects these learners. But the answer is yes, and that's certainly the direction we're looking.
I guess one thing to add is that sort of making the decision to adapt something sort of assumes some causal understanding. And to get there, the kinds of experiments that we ran here to understand what is actually the effect of showing you the different framing is the important first step before we can move towards adaptation.
Do you have information about how perhaps intensely the students examined the prompt?
Mm.
Information?
Like how long they viewed the page?
Well, either how long or if time is an indication of processing that information?
Right. Time, it wasn't. We looked at it. We tracked the time they spent on the widget, because we tracked that. But as is the case with most of our MOOC interventions and studies, we have this problem of compliance, and it's just getting learners to engage. So they did engage, but not as much as we would hope. So, yeah.
A thought would be if you, for instance, just added a slider to say, here's what I'd like to do next time, or something like that. It would at least be a trace that they had looked at each of the points and had thought a little bit about the relationship that they had with that information.
Yeah, so as Ioana said, one of the alterations was that we allowed them to see what the average learner looked like in the following week, but we didn't allow them to state their intentions for the following week, which would make a lot of sense, which Mike is going to talk about, I think.
But I agree it would be interesting to look at the moderation by people who interacted intensely with the tool. Did they benefit more from it than the people who didn't really interact
It's
with it
always
as
a
much?
question about, so it flashes there, do they actually engage with that information?
Yeah.
So I think we'll cut off the questions here. I'll have the next speaker come up. Thanks again.